So Dirty Kansas is about a month away, and because of that, we are declaring the next couple of weeks Gravel Month. We're going to have a lot of content on the YouTube channel and the podcast about gravel. Next couple of PLP Talks is going to look specifically at various gravel events, and we're going to kick Gravel Month off with an interview with Nick Legan. Nick is the technical editor for Adventure Cycling, as well as writing for other websites like Velo News. Recently, he came out with a book called Gravel Cycling, which is the first of its kind that really looks at this cool emergent trend. In this episode of PLP Talks, we're going to discuss the research that went behind the book, where he thinks the gravel trend is on its narrative trajectory, as well as where he thinks gravel cycling is going to go in the future. And before we jump into the interview, this interview, like all the other interviews, is made possible by listeners and viewers like you. I actually wasn't able to secure another sponsor for this month, so if you've enjoyed these interviews, if it's changed your mind or given you things to think about, or has helped you kill an hour on your commute, then consider supporting the show financially. I'll have links in the YouTube description below, as well as in the podcast's show notes. All right, with all that said, if you're interested in gravel, you're gonna love this interview. So put on those earbuds, pretend like you're working at your desk, and enjoy the show. Today's guest literally wrote one of the first books on gravel cycling, so I'm super stoked to have him on the show and talk about this emerging trend, what he sees, what inspired him to write the book. So welcome to the show, Nick Legan. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Russ.
So Nick recently wrote this book, which you haven't seen. You should definitely check out. But what made you want to write a book on gravel cycling? When was it that you thought, wow, this subject really deserves its own specific book?
I mean, the reason I wrote the book was to serve as kind of a love note to gravel riding and to bike packing. I've found gravel cycling and gravel cyclists wildly inspiring. The people are just incredible. And then the places you get to see are phenomenal. So I wanted to kind of show some gratitude for the people who have helped me in the gravel scene. And then hopefully also inspire, people who are gravel curious or bike packing curious. So yeah, it was a long process, but I couldn't be happier with the result.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of timeline wise when you got a sense it was going to become a thing?
Honestly, I did my first Dirty Kansas. My first gravel race was the Dirty Kansas 200. I did it in 2011. And that event had already been going on for 5 or 6 years, I think, at that point. But I was completely blown away. I had been a cyclist since the age of 12, and I just saw something there. Started doing a few more events, and it was like, man, to me, it became just undeniable. And I think for a lot of people who have been to some of these events, whether they're competitive or non-competitive, it's really compelling. I mean, the energy is really, really contagious. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for me, it wasn't a tough thing to decide. Is this a good call or not? Is this am I taking a big risk writing a book here?
Right.
Because I think that for a lot of people, it's infectious.
Yeah, we're doing our first DK this year. Yay!
yeah, I saw that. That's super, super awesome.
Yeah, I'm scared.
Good.
But I guess what do you think is different from the atmosphere or the community around an event like Dirty Kansas that's different from your traditional paved road scene?
That's a good question, and I don't want to slag off on road cycling. I think that's really easy to do. But I was a road cyclist for a lot of years. I was a pro mechanic for a lot of years, and road cycling is really important to me. But it certainly isn't for everyone. It tends to feel hyper competitive. And that isn't for everyone. I mean, it's not for me as a cyclist. I enjoy spectating and helping racers, but road racing, while I did it for a lot of years, doesn't have the same draw for me. And what I really like about the gravel scene and bikepacking too is it's very much, it's just, they welcome you with open arms. They'll meet you at whatever level you're at. And for instance, Dirty Kansas, the finish line, they cheer just as loudly for the last finisher as they do for the first. And it's all about personal challenges. I mean, you and Laura are taking on a big challenge. The fact that you're scared is, and I know you're half joking, but that's what enables growth. You have to put yourself under stress to enable yourself to grow. Mm-hmm. And I think that these events understand that implicitly, and some of them explicitly. They just talk about it. Find your limits was Dirty Kansas' motto a couple of years ago. So you're meeting a whole lot of people who are challenging themselves on whatever level is theirs.
Right, right. Yeah, I've spoken to Jim a couple times, and in one conversation, he kind of presented DK as almost like a theater or a stage for someone to enact their own kind of hero's
Absolutely.
journey,
Absolutely. I mean, it's very Joseph Campbell, very, but I think he takes it very seriously. I mean, Jim's
Yeah.
become a really close friend at this point. I've done some bike packing with him. My wife and I were at their training camp a couple weeks ago, helping out, and they take the task of presenting a venue for someone to challenge themselves very seriously.
Right.
And they almost talk about it with reverence, as like an honorable undertaking. So it's really cool. And we talk on and on about the gravel family, but it is very much a tribe, and that to me is phenomenal.
Right. Why do you think it seems like out of all the regions in the U.S., like the Midwest has really embraced it, and it hasn't I don't think developed to the same scale in the Pacific Northwest or in the West Coast where there's kind of mountains and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm originally from the Midwest, so disclaimer, I'm from Indiana and I love the Midwest. I've lived in Colorado for some time now. But I think the reason it really blew up in the Midwest is because that's what they have. In Colorado or in the West Coast, the East Coast, you have other options that are a real pull for cyclists. Moab, right? You're not, although I've heard the gravel riding is great. And that's what's cool about gravel is that it's embracing that your rides and your local routes are just as cool as climbing up Mount Evans in Colorado.
Right.
And I think that people really took that on board, and they were like, you know what? No, it is awesome. Bike riding in the Midwest is fantastic. It's different, but I think that's why. I think it's also why the overarching theme to gravel racing is it has a very grassroots feel. It's very, I think a lot of people come at it with a lot of humility and again with open arms. So those are really Midwestern qualities.
Right.
And it's cool, but it's also neat to see it grow. I mean, it is certainly growing. There's some great events all over the country at this point. But I'm proud of my Midwestern who have really done well.
Yeah, I think I remember watching a interview with I think it's Jeff Frame from All City, the brand manager there, and he was talking about the gravel scene in the Midwest and how for him it was a huge surprise when he had friends from Colorado or from the West start to come to the Midwest to ride bikes. It's a place that you wouldn't think of, right off the bat as a cycling destination, but gravel has really put that area on the map.
Absolutely. And it's not, I mean, he's in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, but they're doing it all over, which is really, really cool. I mean, the biggest gravel event in North America I covered in my book is called Roubaix up in Michigan. And they focus on kind of shorter distances. But they have, I think it's 2,500. It's the numbers are really big, and Rick Plight will probably correct me, maybe in the comments. But it gets bigger every year, and it's in this little town of Hastings, Michigan, and it's really become part of the town to the point where the routes are permanently marked. They have signage so that you can come ride those routes year round, which is super cool. It's creating destinations, for gravel riding.
Yeah, I got a chance to chat with them and the city manager at Hastings, and they were talking about how because of that event, it's kind of redefined the identity of the town. They've signed it year round with the intent of getting people through the town riding, not just on the day of the event, but like all year to practice for it, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. Or if they want to take it on in a non-competitive way, which is really cool. Emporia is the same way. I mean, I've been going to Emporia since 2011, and I've seen that town change and for the better. I mean, cyclists are welcomed there in a way that's phenomenal. And you see group rides going out, they're all on gravel bikes because that's what they have, or like hardtail mountain bikes. It's super, super cool.
Right. So I guess how do you think, so you did your first DK in 2011. How do you think that the scene as a whole has changed over time?
It's gotten a lot faster. As people like Ted King, as people like Rebecca Rush start coming in, and then even guys like Matt Stevens, who is just crushing. The level at the front, I mean, the pace at the front I can't fathom it because I'm not that fast. But that's cool to see. I have friends who have been winners or top 10 at DK who will never be a winner or a top 10 probably again. And I'm sure that's taken some adjustment for them. But the thing is it's also become it has still remained really inclusive. And the other thing that I think that's really changed is the equipment. When I did my first DK, I was on a Salsa Via, which is a great bike, but that's a touring bike essentially, a dirt road touring bike. And I was scrounging, I rode like Schwalbe marathon tires, set them up tubeless, and because that's what people were telling me to ride. And the number of tires, for instance, produced since 2011 to now that are DK appropriate or not just DK, but that are gravel appropriate has just flourished. I think a lot of people get into these arguments about the tail wagging the dog with the industry and marketing and all this stuff. But at the end, from my perspective, I want a bike that's capable and that's designed for the way I ride. And the industry has certainly responded. And to me, it's a response. They weren't the ones leading the charge. It was people in the Midwest who were riding these roads, and they were trying to figure out the best way to get it done.
Yeah.
So I think it's super cool.
Yeah, it's one thing I definitely love about this time in bicycles. It's such an awesome time to be a bike nerd.
Really. Yeah, I've written about that before. I call it the golden age of cycling because you can build whatever. I mean, if you want to do a Jeff Jones loop bar, Fargo with a dynamo and a roll off, you can. If you get into a pinion gearbox, whatever the case is, you can build really weird bikes that are perfect for you though, that suit your needs almost 1-to-1. And that hasn't always been the case. So I mean, I nerd out and I ride like Di2 bikes with hydraulic disc brakes, and I get into carbon wheels and all that kind of stuff. But I'm lining up next to a guy in a Surly cross check, and he's just as likely to beat me as anything. Which is super super neat. I mean, I like that. The diversity of personality and of bikes is really fun.
So let's touch on bikes really quickly. You get to test a lot of different bikes. What's your current favorite gravel bike?
Ooh.
Or does it exist yet?
Sorry, say that again?
Or does it exist yet?
No, I think there's certainly some really, really great bikes out there. I think it depends on where you ride. I mean, the bike that I would recommend for Dirty Kanza is probably different than the bike I would recommend for, say, Gravel Worlds. And we do review some of those for adventure cyclists, which is cool. I got to say that the Salsa Cutthroat is pretty phenomenal, especially if you're looking to potentially bike pack as well. I have a column I'm going to write for Adventure Cyclists coming up about the difference between a gravel bike and a bike packing bike, because I think the industry sometimes gets a little confused there. In my opinion, a gravel bike is a gravel bike and a bike packing bike is a bike packing bike, but you can usually ride gravel really well with a bike packing bike and not necessarily the opposite is true. So the Cutthroat is fantastic because you have, even if you run like a 40 mil tire, you have mega mud clearance. I'm a fan of drop bars, and that's become kind of the go-to bike for the guys in Emporia. There are a lot of great ones though. I've been riding Specialized Diverge lately with their Future Shock, and that thing's pretty phenomenal. So I think if you're coming at it as a mountain biker, the bike that will best serve your needs is a little bit different than if you're coming at it as a road cyclist, say. So it's a fair question, but it's a really tough question to answer. There are some. I mean, Mosaic, my buddy Aaron Barczyk at Mosaic, he built me a custom drop bar 29er, but he does these beautiful titanium gravel bikes, and depending on your needs, that could be the best bike on the planet.
Yeah, Cutthroat's an interesting bike. Laura and I have a pair, and I feel like when Salsa first introduced it, it was like squarely in the bike packing space. And now, like you said, people have been swapping out the bigger mountain bike tires for smaller tires for the mud clearance. And it's just like a comfortable, like all-day riding bike with massive clearance.
With massive clearance. I mean, the guys at Land Run, which is a race in Stillwater, Oklahoma, that is legendary for its mud. It has this red clay mud that can just ruin bikes. But a lot of those guys are riding Cutthroats too with 40 mils, and on a bike that has room for 2.4-inch wide tires. So that is certainly a really interesting bike. But Salsa's been a leader in this category. I don't think there's any doubt. Some would argue that they've kind of created these segments. I mean, they produced the first production gravel bike, to my knowledge, and I write about that in the book, The Warbird. But there are a lot of people who are doing it, I would say, just as well now. They caught up quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of great options out there.
Yeah, it's for me. I think it's also interesting to see like what people consider a wide tire and how that's changed. Like I think the Warbird came out and it was spec'd with like 35, not super big clearance, but then now like 35 seems kind of small for a lot of gravel events.
I kind of rarely ride a 35 or smaller. 40 is kind of, in my head, if someone's talking about a gravel bike and it doesn't clear a 40 mil tire, I don't discount it immediately because it might be perfect for, like Belgian Waffle Ride just happened last weekend, and that's a very kind of tarmac centric. It has dirt sections.
Great.
So it might again be perfect for those situations. But the way I ride a gravel bike, I certainly want clearance for 40s or maybe even more because I like to hit. I'll ride tarmac. I'll ride dirt roads. I'll ride gravel roads. I ride old mining roads here in Colorado, and we also hit single track connectors. Mild mountain bike trails. It just depends on how you're using your bike.
Yeah, I'm excited about 650B starting to trickle in. I feel like you get the suspension. You can there's high performance like low tread tires, and there's knobby ones as well. So. Yeah,
the WTB Horizon, the Byway, and then more and more people are making those. Donnelly, Terravale, Terrene, on and on. I mean, I think you've reviewed some of those. And that is what's also cool is that with one bike, it can be kind of a transformer. With a lot of have clearance for like a 700 by 42, and then the 27.5, or as you say, the 650B by like a 2.1. That's kind of cool. You can really dial it in for you. You can also, even if you have like standover clearance issues, you can run the 650B and get a little bit lower top tube, and it's like you said.
That's why I love it as a shorter rider. It's like it's finally like a bike with like wheel dimensions that fit me. So.
Yeah. Well, and again, like you said, it's a great time to be a bike nerd.
I also think it's a bit of like a Wild West in terms of bike design at the moment. People are like, "What's the standard?" And like, how do we talk about these bikes?
Yeah,
it's interesting because I think like the industry seems really comfortable about like road and mountain, but this gravel and bike packing, it's there's a little bit more of a gray area that they're still kind of wrapping their heads around like what is the appropriate bike? What are the bikes that people want? Like, what are like the demands of the rider? So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think that, if you're a road rider, it's easier to go into a shop and buy a bike, install your pedals, set your seat height, and go for a ride. And you don't necessarily have to change anything. But I don't know of too many gravel bikes that I would ride stock and take to an event. Part of that is, to me, fun. That I've changed tires, for instance, for almost every race. But part of it is, I think, to your point, that the industry is still figuring it out. But that's okay. It's these growing pains can be fun. They can lead down some blind alleys for sure. There are definitely some weird bikes out there. But again, like there are people who are going to say that's that blind alley, if it didn't continue to grow, to them it's the greatest shame in the world. People become real fans of their own bikes, which is great. But yeah, it's interesting to me to see where it's going to go. I mean, you mentioned the word standard with an S on the end of it, and that standard should be singular, right? Not the plural. So it is frustrating. But the thing is the people who I think continually berate our industry for having multiple standards, I feel their pain especially as a former bike shop mechanic. But it's not going to change anytime soon. We're only going to continue to see a proliferation of different ways to mount a brake and put a wheel into a frame. So unfortunately, we just have to, get up to speed. My big relief has been just the renewal interest in threaded bottom brackets.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll put that right there. That's a big win.
Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's inside your book. You cover domestic and international events. What was the research like when you were compiling stuff for the book?
Google Translate was definitely involved at times. No, actually, the international events were super cool. I didn't get a chance to attend any of them, but people were super excited. And some of them, Paul Arrington, for instance, the Dirty Reaver, he came and did Dirty Kansas and then started the Dirty Reaver. So it's it's easy to connect the dots.
Right.
But the research was great. I mean, I had a blast with it. I mean, writing the book took something like a year and a half from kind of concept to finalized manuscript. But I got to interview a lot of people who were kind of heroes of mine. So on the event side, but also just kind of personalities in the space. Yeah, it was great. And then I was able to go to a lot of events in North America, which is really cool. So.
Do you have any sense of how or if the international gravel events differ from the ones in the States? Or are they pretty similar?
Well, yeah, they certainly differ in some ways, but some of them are very similar. I mean, the cover of the book is from an event in Germany, Gravel Fondo, and they have from discussing with its founder, it has a very kind of grinduro, very laid back, very kind of party vibe. Like people hang out around campfires afterwards, and drink amazing German beer, I'm sure. And stuff like Gravel 66 in the Pyrenees. Those guys, they encourage you to bring like beer with you for the finish, so for like a tailgate essentially. They all hang out in a parking lot and drink beer.
Yeah.
So I think they have the theme that runs through all of these events has got to just be fun. Fun will always be relevant, whether you're competitive or not. Right. Fun is fun. So I think that there's a lot of really cool things going on. I do think that Grinduro, which is a North American event, they actually have one in Scotland now, and I've heard some rumors of some other ones around the globe. They're playing a format, right? So it's just time segments as opposed to race 100 miles as fast as you can,
right?
Which is a cool play on it. I think the vibe is pretty consistently just let's go have a good time on bikes, and I think in a lot of them they're trying to take you down a road or a path where at some points your bike will be ideal and at frequent points it will not be ideal.
Right.
That's the Grasshopper series in California with Mega Elf Crawford.
Right. His
big thing is he's really coy about bike recommendations because he's like, hey, you tell me, man, how do you ride? and I think that's fun. That's adventure. Is if everything goes to plan, it's not an adventure.
Yeah.
It's just a ride. So.
Yeah. I like that underbiking is becoming a thing. That it's okay to have like not the most like appropriate or like overbuilt bike for the course.
Yeah, and I underbiking, I think that's cool too. I also think that what's cool is just riding the bike you already have. I think there are a lot of bikes that just are neglected or not ridden much because we're constantly bombarded with the newest, latest thing.
Right.
And a lot to be said for making do sometimes. So yeah, which is maybe a different take on kind of what you said, but
yeah. So of the international events that you cover in the book, which one are you like dying to do first?
Yeah, well, there's a couple. I would love to do the Great Otway gravel grinder in Australia. I've spent a little bit of time down there, but not in that area, and that looks phenomenal. But the one that has to top my list is La Resistance in Annecy. They have the riding just looks phenomenal. It's these old. It's roads that were used in World War II, actually, by troops for movement, and they were almost essentially abandoned now. And they've actually created now a 3-day event where you do a 2-day bike pack, self-guided, and then the 3rd day is you join the kind of more supported ride. So that looks phenomenal,
right?
Just without it, unbelievable. If you've ever just Googled Lake Annecy or Annecy, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I read about that event in your book. It's a cool like combination of both the gravel event and the bike packing element to it. Do you think this is how gravel events will evolve?
I can see it happening. Rebecca's Private Idaho had a stage race last year, and I believe they're moving forward with it. So whether you look at it as a stage race or as a non-competitive, that to me is the crux of the question is, will it be competitive or will it be participatory? And I think there's a place for both. Right. But it's just how is each individual event going to try to grow? Dirty Kansas is a good example. I mean, they've kind of reached max capacity or close to it. They had to go to a lottery system to get in. And so for this year, they have the DKXL, which is a self-supported 350-mile version that I'm a little bit freaked out about because I'll be doing that with my wife and 32 other people.
Right.
And so we'll see where it goes. What Jim Cummins and Leland Danes and Tim and Christy Moan, the owners of Dirty Kansas, though, are doing it is pretty cool because they're also developing, kind of like you mentioned with Hastings, Michigan, and Barry Roubaix. They're not signing the routes, but they're creating a resource so that if you want to just go on vacation in Emporia, here's some rides to do. Or if you want to go bike packing and check out the Flint Hills, here's a way to do it. So I could see that very much happening, where you have your event and then around it you have ancillary routes or things you can do to take part in a different way. So I think that's smart.
Yeah. A lot of our other previous work was around this idea of bicycle tourism, using bikes, or bike riding to bring people out from cities to rural areas. And it seems like gravel riding is such the perfect fit, where as long as you have like lodging, food, maybe a brewery, and like empty roads.
That's the big one. But I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's also what Adventure Cyclist, and that's where girlfriend works now, tries to do, is encourage bicycle travel. And bicycle travel is almost always, whether it's not always, but it's most of the time tourist based. Sometimes it's just going to work, right?
Yeah.
But I think that is the way to go, and that's why I think gravel has a really bright future, is because it's getting kind of scary on roads with distracted drivers, more drivers. There were 40 cyclists killed in Boulder County, Colorado last year. Wow. That's a lot. That's kind of scary. On the other hand, you have mountain biking, where you get away from cars entirely, which is cool, but it's skill based, and it also requires a lot of infrastructure to build and maintain trails. The middle ground, in my opinion, is gravel cycling, where there's a little bit of skill involved to have some confidence on a surface that's basically constantly moving under your tires.
Right. But you're not going to fall off a cliff.
Or you're much less likely to get knocked off your bike by a passing vehicle. The one thing I would say is that we can help keep gravel awesome by waving, by communicating with farmers, not getting in their way. Don't spook their cattle, things like that. We are in rural areas, and it's kind of a different set of rules. Kind of a different set of be cool rules to learn. And that's on us, right? I mean, it's just like hikers disliking mountain bikers. Well, not all mountain bikers are jerks, but a few of them are. Right. And we need to have that same sort of running dialogue in our head. Like, am I, if I come up on some horses, what's the best protocol? Announce yourself, slow down. So, but I think it has a really, really bright future, because it's also just fun. It gets you out to these rural places that are gorgeous, and it allows you to challenge yourself. Right.
Yeah, that is a good point. I remember we had interviewed this guy out in Eastern Oregon that had a hunting lodge, but when hunting season would end, he'd have to kind of lay his staff off until the next hunting season. But then he saw cyclists pedaling in his area, so he's like, "Well, I've got the facility. I just have to change out the beer from like Miller to like IPA." So he's converted this hunting lodge to hunting half the year, and then like gravel cycling and road cycling the other half. And when we were talking with him, he did mention there were like a couple things, like if you see a cattle grate, close the gate behind you if you cross it. Respect private property, but also waving was a big thing. He's like, a lot of these farmers or ranchers, they don't see many cyclists, and you're kind of in their area. It may seem like
an adjustment for both parties.
Yeah. So, but that's funny. That was like his biggest tip. It's like, just wave to them.
No, those lodges on the Great Divide mountain bike route are also like that. Like the Montana High Country Lodge is exactly the same thing. It's a hunting lodge during hunting season, and they are the most welcoming people to Tour Divide racers and Great Divide touring cyclists. And it just makes sense. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. Did you, so Eben, Bike Snob, wrote an article for Outside. I don't know if you caught it, but he uses the frame Golden Age of Cycling. And he brings up the point, is it really though? Yes, we can do all this. We have electric shifting and everything, and gravel cycling's becoming a thing. But is it more of like a response to predatory nature of cars? Because traffic has gone so bad, it's like, okay, we have to kind of divert where we're going to ride.
Yeah, I take his point. I haven't read it, but based on your synopsis of it, I take his point. But personally, and this is just my predilection, but I like dirt roads better. So to me, it's not like a second best option. To me, it's the best option. But that's not a great answer for people who just love road cycling and that's all they want to do. Right. So there's certainly a lot of work to be done. I think that becoming a member of some nonprofit organizations who are lobbying for cyclists in Washington is a good way to go. Adventure Cyclist has those people. I have to plug people who employ me. They certainly are doing some of that. And I also think that technology will continue to help us. I mean, and that takes time. Cars become safer over time, but that doesn't mean that it's illegal to drive your car from the 1970s. So, and you hope that more and more states start to pass, laws against texting or laws against holding your phone in your hand. And the thing is, though, let's also be really honest here. It's not just cell phones. I mean, distracted driving is distracted driving. Eating a hamburger is distracted driving, and I eat while I drive my car. So we're all in this together. I do drive a car, and so I don't want to create an us versus them. To me, this is how do all these people get along in this space, and I think that's important. I think people get really fired up because bad things are happening to their friends. I understand that, but I'm not sure that us versus them is the best way to frame the discussion, because people tend to shut down when you set them up as your adversary. You know?
For sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, where do you, in terms of I guess the narrative arc of this of gravel cycling, do you see it still on the rise, at its peak?
That's a good question. I don't think it's peaked yet. Personally, I think we're still, and I say that based on conversations I have within the industry and around my book. There are a lot of people who are kind of just hearing about it. I think you and I are probably big consumers of cycling media. Right. We're like, well, this is old news, right? There are people who don't spend all day online checking out bike stuff because they're probably busy living their lives and working their jobs and riding their bikes. So I think that the message is still spreading without a doubt. I don't think it's peaked. I think it's going to be interesting to see. But I also think that it probably has a longer lifespan than, say, I mean, not to bag on, but like aero road bikes. The number of people who would be interested in a gravel bike is, I think, far greater than the number of people who are interested in a time trial bike or an aero road bike, or a mountain bike with 160 millimeters of travel. So I do think it's very democratic in a way. There are a lot of people who
it's a people's bike.
It is. I don't want to call it the Volks, rod. What is that called? Rod sport is German for cycling, but anyway, I think rod is bicycle. Yeah, Volksrad. Sorry. Yeah. But it is kind of a people's bike, and because they make great commuters, I've raced cyclocross on them. I just have a set of wheels that have more of a road tire, and I ride road on it. My poor road bike barely gets ridden anymore. So yeah, I also think, though, that for a subset of people who get into riding dirt and gravel roads, bike packing will also be. I talk about gravel cycling as a gateway drug to bike packing, and there's no way it's going to be 100% conversion, but it becomes something that, like, oh, well, what about that? So, yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's peaked yet?
No. I mean, judging from the comments in our YouTube and the questions I constantly get, it's there's still like a long discovery process. I did like a ranty video about gravel bikes and stuff, and people are like, I just discovered this kind of bike, and my bike shop told me it was dumb, but after hearing your rant, it's kind of the bike I want. What I hear a lot from the comments is like there's some. From kind of snobbish bike shop people, they're like, "Oh, gravel bikes are dumb. You can ride any bike on a gravel road," which is true. But stripping the word gravel away from the bike, at its essence, you get like a practical drop bar bike. But people see that name and they just, some people get put off, or like, I don't ride gravel enough to justify this bike. But strip it from that name and like all the pretext of adventure or whatever. It's like the road bike for everybody.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. There are all sorts of analogies to be made here with cars and things like that too, but yeah, I think that we're an industry that loves to hate itself. There's a lot of strange psychology that goes on there. But I think what I like about it is because it is a bike for a lot of people. is that it's just really inclusive. So even if you have a competitive slant, that's fine. But to me, gravel cycling and the experience is more than anything. I think it's easy to get mired in tech talk,
Right, for sure.
But I would argue more importantly, the experiences I've had on gravel bikes have been almost entirely positive and uplifting and about sharing experience. I got to meet some amazing people at that Dirty Kansas training camp, and they were all so supportive of one another. You know, it was like Jay Peterberry and Yuri Halswald and Dan Hughes. And Dan, I mentioned you, buddy, 4-time DK winner. He gives me a lot of grief because I forgot to mention my book. But it was just as amazing were the people who had never. There was a guy at the camp who had never ridden gravel until the day before the camp.
Oh, rad! Yeah.
How cool is that? You know.
Yeah.
And he gets to learn then from these people who have a lot of experience in that world. So it's to me, it's such a good time, and it certainly hasn't peaked for me. You know.
Yeah.
So
for sure. Do you think there's any danger in as the events get more competitive from it taking away from the sense of a family or grassroots feeling?
I could absolutely see that happening at certain events, and I'm not blaming anyone for that. But a lot of the culture of gravel cycling is top down, right? So the promoters can create an atmosphere of fun and that's relaxed and that's inclusive, or they can start to cater to the top 10% finishers, you know. And look, it's we're talking about events that I don't own, so but you can run your event however you want.
Right.
I could see some events going that way, but they're doing that potentially. There might be a reason, and the reason might be they're trying to draw in road cyclists. You know, they're trying to create more gravel cyclists, so that might be a good thing. On the whole, though, I think that certainly in the Midwest and those events and the people I see riding those events, if they start to feel that, even as, I mean, I don't think that numbers, you know, there's no threshold. It's like, oh, you're over 1,000 people. You're not grassroots anymore. There are no rules. You know what I mean?
Right.
So as long as the vibe is there, I think people continue to go back, even if it becomes more expensive, the race. I think that in the Midwest, at least, they won't tolerate it in a way, you know. Or I should say, they just won't go. They might not voice their opinion, but they just won't show up. They won't sign up.
Right.
So I don't think it's a big problem. I think it's just that kind of just be cool, you know. But again, some of the best days I had a DK where I broke my rear derailleur off and limped like a single speed, you know, and I was having a lot of problems getting it to work well.
Yeah.
And I was basically at the back of the group. I mean, I barely made the first time cutoff because I had so much trouble with my bike.
Right.
But the people back there, it was amazing because I would pass these people and then I'd have to stop and fix something, and then they'd pass me back and I'd pass them, and it was this really cool yo-yo, and I'd be cheering for them and they'd be cheering for me, and they were just stoked to be there, man. I mean, I saw a guy on a Fargo with a rear rack and a pannier full of food and clothes, you know. Hey, and that's certainly one way to do it. I'm not saying that to make fun of them, but to me it was that much more inspiring. So those people are still very, very welcome, you know, at every event that I've attended. So.
Yeah, I think that's where, you know, it's kind of more interesting. Like, I feel like, you know, top 10%, you know, there's no question of whether they're going to finish. It's, you know, it's how fast they get to the finish. But like at, you know, mid-pack to the end, you know, there's a real chance for failure. And that's where you see growth and drama, you know.
Yeah, and meltdowns.
Yeah.
and incredible overcoming.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think it's really, really cool. And there are a lot of people at the friend race who have said exactly what you just said. You know, like, to me, it's about beating these other guys. It's not conquering the course,
right.
Or even their own demons, maybe. And so that's what I mean by it's a challenge, and the challenge is at different levels, or it means different things to different people. So that really resonates with a lot of people. Certainly does with me.
Cool. Well, how has someone asked on Instagram, how has the book been received, and if there's anything you would change? Like
other than Dan Hughes, everyone did.
You just put Dan Hughes on the cover.
Yeah. Well, he has a point. He did win. He's finished like 10 of them, and he won 4 of them. And Yuri, I talked to Yuri about nutrition because he works at GU, and he's a past winner. And honestly, Dan, I just had Yuri's email. I didn't have it. And we journalists and writers are lazy. I think. But no, it's been received really well, thankfully. I couldn't be happier with the response. I mean, I would love to sell more. You always want to sell more. I didn't do it to, finance a house. I did it because I care about gravel cycling. And that maybe sounds corny, but it's true. I just really, really love the scene, and anything I can do to make it easier to get into, I want to do. In terms of what I would change, there isn't a lot, actually. I think I stand by everything I wrote in there in terms of advice. And I think I was also able to share a lot of great advice from people like Leo Wilcox, Eric Parsons, John Stamsted, Joe Miser, people like that. So I think we had the creme de la creme in terms of the gravel and bikepacking world contributing, which was incredible. I mean, their generosity was really bowled me over. I think the big question is if we sell enough of them, do we do a second volume and talk about some new events or things like that? And then obviously technology is always moving on. So, the way we talk about how, I have a section in there on building your dream gravel or bikepacking bike. So that could be potentially updated. But no, I think as it sits, it's a really, really good piece that'll have some good shelf life. And I think beyond that, it's beautiful, personally. And I say that, while fully admitting that I didn't take a single picture or do a single illustration in the book. That's probably why it's beautiful. I'm a words guy. Yeah. But we worked really hard with some amazing photographers to get the book where it is. And I think it's just, it's beautiful. I don't think it's the kind of book that you typically just sit down and read cover to cover. I think it's the sort of book you graze through it and something catches your attention and you dive into that section. And we hope that you can access it from a lot of different kind of physical locations in the book or a lot of kind of personal experience positions. So yeah, I'm really happy with it.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful book. The photography is awesome. It definitely sets up like a bucket list of events and things to do for potential writers. I've totally enjoyed it. Really recommend it to folks. For people that want to get the book, where's the best place to purchase it?
Well, I'm happy to sell you one on my blog, rambler.com. That's RAMBLEUR.com. Excuse me. You can also get it through the VeloPress website. Amazon sells it, and then shops that are in the know sell it. There's a lot of good gravel shops like Dan Hughes. His Sunflower shop in Lawrence, Kansas is a stocking bike shop. Gravel City in Emporia, all over. So there are lots of ways to get it.
Right. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for being on the show. And again, if you guys are interested in the book, I will put links in the YouTube description below or in the show notes if you're listening to this via podcast. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Russ. Have a good one.
Thanks again for joining us for another episode of PLP Talks. Again, if you enjoy this show and want to support it, check out the links in the description or in the podcast show notes. So thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep the supple side down.